With the latest agriculture news from across the state and nation, it's time for the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. Here's your host, Sabrina Halvorson.
Good morning, and thank you for tuning in this morning to the AgNet News Hour. Coming up later, a new University of California study estimates the costs for growing coastal organic strawberries. We'll have details on that, but our top story today, the USDA released its recommended changes to all 11 federal milk marketing orders. Chad Smith has more on the mixed results for farmers and ranchers.
The USDA held a 49-day federal milk marketing order hearing and listened to hundreds of hours of testimony, which resulted in reform proposals released this week. Roger Cryan, chief economist with the American Farm Bureau, says the changes have some positives.
It increases the value returned to farmers for bottling milk through increases to location values and some formula adjustments. But most important, it restores the higher of the cheese or butter powder values in the bottling milk price instead of the average plus price formula that was used since 2019. And there's some not so good stuff. The biggest issue is there's substantial reductions in all the class prices to allow for higher processing costs. And the problem with that is that we don't really have good data to demonstrate higher processing costs.
Cryan says a couple of key Farm Bureau ideas didn't make it into the USDA proposal.
We thought there was a really good argument to increase the differential on the class 2 milk, which is the milk used to produce a whole variety of products. And that would have meant millions of dollars for farmers. And USDA disagreed with that. We thought it was important to add 640-pound blocks of cheddar cheese to the product price survey that sets the cheese milk price, because in 5 or 10 years, there won't be enough 40-pound blocks to set a fair price. And USDA disagreed with that.
A comment period is open on the final rule, and Cryan said Farm Bureau will be submitting a number of ideas.
Those will be due probably about the middle of September. The USDA will put out a rule probably in the middle of November, and that'll be voted on by producers and co-ops. In the meantime, farmers can call their members of Congress to get a new farm bill as soon as possible, because every version of the farm bill that we've seen includes an audited mandatory survey of processors' costs. And that data could help us get these make allowances straight and hopefully get some of that money back to farmers.
Learn more by searching FMMO at FB.org. Chad Smith, Washington.
Fruit growers are switching to other crops in Canada. Dennis Guy reports.
After 2 years of weather event extremes, followed by a devastating winter cold snap in mid-January, some British Columbia fruit tree operators are cutting trees, pulling stumps, and planting crops that will give them at least some cash flow this growing season. Extremely low temperatures in mid-January severely damaged stone fruit trees and grapevines in the Okanagan Valley region, killing the buds on branches that would have been this season's crops. The stone fruit crops, peaches, apricots, and nectarines suffered the worst damage. Conversely, apple trees tolerated the January deep freeze relatively well and experienced much less damage. British Columbia has more orchard farms than any other province in Canada and has twice as many orchard growers as Ontario and Quebec combined. Nearly all of BC's tree fruits are grown in the Okanagan Valley, where cherries, nectarines, and peaches are the most commonly grown. Janelle Oliver of Kelowna ripped out about 3 acres of peach trees this spring after not one of her peach trees flowered. To salvage this year's growing season, Oliver has planted field crops, including several melon varieties, where her peach tree orchard stood.
We've got melons. We're planting so many more muskmelons, cantaloupe, and watermelon this year because of the loss of the peaches.
The crop loss for fruit farmers is just the latest blow in a string of extreme weather events in recent years. In 2021, a record-setting heat dome scorched BC orchards and stressed fruit trees. The past 2 winters have seen extreme cold, resulting in crop losses for fruit farmers. Alan Gatsky grows mainly apples, and he expects to have a crop this year, but Gatsky says that British Columbia's stable weather patterns have become much less dependable.
There's no doubt in my mind that the weather has been more volatile in the last decade. We're seeing a lot of records on the high and down on the low. We do best when we can count on the weather. And so that does concern me as a person who makes a living from a stable environment.
In March of this year, the BC government announced a $70 million program for fruit growers to replant and strengthen orchards and vineyards in the province. But Ron McMillan, a fruit and grape grower in the Okanagan Valley, says that funding does little to help farmers in the short term. McMillan says that both government and consumers need to realize that there will be far less product being supplied by Okanagan growers this year.
I think this is a wake-up for people that are non-farmers. Farmers have been realizing something's been going on for a while, been sounding the alarm, but not everybody's been listening. There's going to be a lot of changes going on as people try and figure out ways to make this work.
To meet Western Canadian demand this year, the BC Fruit Growers Association says that more tender fruit like peaches and nectarines will have to be imported from the U.S. and other countries. Reporting from Canada, I'm Dennis Guy.
You're listening to the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. In today's National Spotlight, for the last several decades, growers have fought soybean cyst nematode, or SCN, with very few tools in the toolbox. Now, BASF Agricultural Solutions is changing that with Nemasphere, nematode-resistant trait. BASF Trait Development Manager Michael McCarville says it's the most groundbreaking innovation in SCN management in more than 60 years.
Yeah, so the pest is not new, as soybean cyst nematode is the #1 yield-reducing pathogen in the United States. It's been that way for the last 50 years. And management has been rather stagnant for the last 2 to 3 decades, with most management relying on native resistance traits. So if you look at what's available to the farmer today, 97% of what he grows is going to be SCN resistant. And that primarily comes from 2 sources, either PI 8788 or PCANE. And with all great things in agriculture, pests adapt to good management tools. So BASF is looking at bringing the first transgenic trait to market, Nemasphere, to help improve soybean cyst nematode management for U.S. farmers.
McCarville says the effectiveness of native SCN traits is declining significantly. To combat this problem, Nemasphere produces a protein that is ingested by nematodes. It interferes with nutrient uptake in their intestines, which leads to the nematode's death.
Yeah, since management focuses around the planting of resistant varieties and the pest has been adapting to that, here we're going to bring a new technology. BT or cry proteins, like the farmer knows for insect management in corn, we're bringing that technology to soybean to manage soybean cyst nematode. This will be the first time in agriculture that we've used a BT or cry protein for nematode management. And so this is going to allow us to bring a totally new mode of action to attack that #1 pest in soybean. So it's going to allow us to stack a cry protein with native resistance to get us to a level of SCN management that we need to be profitable.
The technology is currently going through the registration process. McCarville expects growers to be able to plant the Nemasphere variety in the 2028 season. That's today's National Spotlight. Now here's the Livestock Report. You've been hearing a lot lately about biosecurity and traceability because of the foreign animal diseases impacting the livestock industry. CJ Miller reports on a tool that's available for those in the pork industry.
It's an online platform that brings the capabilities of tracking movements of pigs.
And that's Chad Martin, Director of Strategic Outreach with Indiana Pork, talking about AgView. And that platform is free for pork producers.
Will allow us to identify where a pig individually or as a group of pigs in a shipment have been brought from and where they're headed to thereafter and how much time they've spent in all those different locations.
AgView is supported by the National Pork Board and funded by the Pork Checkoff. And with the busy show pig season underway, including the Indiana State Fair in August, Martin says the platform can provide real-time health status updates, plus site and pig movement data from participating farms to state animal health officials in the event that there's a confirmed case of a foreign animal disease among swine in the U.S.
So if you think about the journey of a show pig from California, they may have stopped at a couple of different locations as a resting place and maybe commingled at a show here and there between then and getting to the exposition. If we can monitor those movements, we can better able to understand where those disease pressures are located, where to contain those diseases, and then eventually, hopefully, eradicate them before they spread.
The biggest concern among those in the pork industry is that African swine fever is brought into the U.S.
There was a study that was recently conducted that released the numbers of $79 billion of economic loss over a 10-year period if African swine fever were to infiltrate the country. So what we need to do and be proactive is to understand measures how to contain that disease before it spreads to that magnitude.
Learn more about the AgView platform at agview.com. You can also find that link at HoosierAgToday.com. I'm CJ Miller.
Most categories in USDA's latest quarterly hogs and pigs report showed year-over-year increases, yet producers are holding back in one category. Rod Bain reports.
A year-over-year increase in U.S. hog and pig inventory. That is the forecast in USDA's latest quarterly revision. This is livestock analyst Shale Shagam.
The number of hogs and pigs on June 1st was 74.5 million head, which was up about 1.3% from a year ago, which gave us a market hog inventory of 68.5 million head, which was up 1.7%.
While those categories reflected rises from the previous year,
producers kept about 6 million head of breeding hogs, which was down 3.2% from a year ago.
Farrowings and pigs per litter for the quarter were also up from the previous year.
During the period of March-May, producers farrowed about 2.9 million head of sows, which was just fractionally higher than a year ago. However, the number of pigs per litter during that period was at 11.56 pigs per litter, which was up about 2% from a year ago. That gave us a pig crop during that period of 34 million head, which was up 1.8% from a year ago.
Yet Shagam notes lower farrowing intentions for the next two quarter periods of the year.
We have seen some positive returns over the past couple of months for hog producers, which is probably getting them a bit excited about expansion. But on the other hand, we have seen some relatively weak hog prices in the past couple of months, which probably is injecting a little bit of caution in their thoughts going forward.
So what does this all mean from the perspective of potential pork production for the remainder of 2024?
As we take these pig crop numbers that we're seeing out into the second half of the year, which was most of them would be slaughter ready, we are looking at some higher slaughter numbers relative to a year earlier. And if you factor in the kind of weight growth we've been seeing recently, probably some higher pork production in the second half of 2024 relative to 2023.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Gary Crawford joins us now with a look at the price of chicken for your next cookout.
If you're like me, heaven forbid, you're just now on your way to the store to buy meat for that cookout. USDA livestock analyst Shale Shagam's been poring over hundreds of grocery store sale flyers and online specials from across the country, and on average, nationally, he's finding both beef and pork costing a little bit more than last year. But for chicken, it's going to be a mixed bag. For example,
boneless, skinless breasts this week are being featured at about $2.68 a pound, compared to about $3.04 a pound last year.
So that's 36 cents a pound cheaper than last year.
On the other hand, leg quarters are a little bit higher at $1.41 a pound compared to $1.38 a pound a year ago.
Shale says he's noticed one thing this year for meat in general. More stores are putting more meat products on sale in hopes of getting more shoppers into their stores to buy other goodies for that cookout. Gary Crawford reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. We will be back in just a moment with more agriculture news. Coming up in a few moments, we'll have today's This Land of Ours report, but first, more of the day's agriculture news. And with today's AgNet West headlines, here's Brian German.
New reports are available to help growers estimate the costs and potential returns for strawberry production on the Central Coast. One study covers organic production while the other highlights conventional production. The organic study models a 30-acre farm with 27 acres planted with organic strawberries, and the conventional study assumes a farm operation of 50 acres of rented land with strawberries planted on 45 acres. Each of the studies details cultural practices for production and harvest, including land preparation, soil fertility, pest management, irrigation, and labor needs. They outline the cost for each operation, material inputs, and overhead, both cash and non-cash, for one production and harvest cycle. Both reports also include a ranging analysis of potential profits or losses over different prices and yields. Each of the studies are available on the UC Davis Department of Agricultural and Resource Economics website. Purdue University researchers have created a new biosensor technology for agriculture inspired by COVID-19 advancements. The system, which detects fecal contamination using a marker called Bacteroideus, provided 100% accurate results within an hour during tests on a commercial lettuce farm. Typically, contamination detection involves measuring pathogens. However, this method uses LAMP technology on paper-based devices for faster results. The team tested the technology in California and Indiana, comparing field and lab results. They used plastic flags to collect bioaerosol samples, which were then analyzed using a portable kit. The kit included a drop dispenser, paper devices, and a heating imager, which should allow growers to perform tests directly in the field. Although the system performed well, ongoing research is needed to refine contamination thresholds. The U.S. Department of Agriculture has issued its proposed amendments to all 11 federal milk marketing orders. The amendments aim to make several updates, including changes to milk composition factors, removal of 500-pound barrel cheddar cheese prices from surveys, update to Class 3 and 4 formula factors, and the establishment of a new base Class 1 skim milk price formula. American Farm Bureau Federation President Zippy Duvall appreciated USDA recognizing some of their concerns related to milk pricing, but criticized some changes that he believes favor processors over struggling dairy farmers. Greg Dowd, President and CEO of the National Milk Producers Federation, praised the USDA's decision for reflecting many of their recommendations despite some deviations. Stakeholders are invited to submit feedback on USDA's recommendations, with a producer vote expected in early 2025. This summer, the U.S. Department of Agriculture is seeking feedback from producers about grazing and forestry practices. The Conservation Practice Adoption Motivation Survey is a joint project between USDA's National Agricultural Statistics Service and Natural Resources Conservation Service. Surveys will be sent out to 43,000 forest and grazing landowners and managers nationwide. The survey aims to understand why people adopt various conservation practices and if they continue using them. This data will help improve voluntary conservation programs. NASA's already been inviting people to respond online, and questionnaires are beginning to be mailed out starting today. Survey recipients can respond online, by mail, or fax. Protected by federal law, responses are confidential and used for statistical purposes only. No single respondent can be identified from the published data, which is expected to be released in October. American Pistachio Growers is expanding its traditional annual membership luncheon into a full-day event with informational sessions, exhibits, and networking opportunities. The Pistachio Industry Insights Day is scheduled for July 26th at the Visalia Convention Center beginning at 8 in the morning. The event is open to the entire pistachio industry and will feature a breakfast with keynote speaker Assemblymember Dr. Jasmeet Bains, along with PCA and CCA continuing education credits available. APG staff will be providing up-to-date information regarding the state of the industry, global marketing, nutrition research, and advocacy. Some of the other topics of discussion will include new approaches to navel orangeworm management, as well as identification, treatment, and management of Carpophilus beetle. More information is available on the upcoming events page at agnetwest.com. I'm Brian German for AgNet West Radio Network.
There may be some relief coming in food prices. That's coming up on This Land of Ours.
As we pass the halfway point in 2024, the news on the cost of food continues to improve. Last month, the Agriculture Department was predicting that grocery store food prices would only go up an average of 1.2% this year. But now,
prices for food at home or groceries are predicted to increase by 1% in 2024.
USDA economist Megan Schweitzer.
And that's compared to last year, prices rose by 5%. And the previous year, in 2022, prices rose by 11.4%.
So a 1% hike in grocery store food prices would be a welcome thing. But remember, this 1% is an average of all foods. Megan says we're still going to pay a little more for things like beef, but there are foods that will cost us less than a year ago, including fish and seafood and milk and dairy products. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
You are listening to the AgNet News Hour. The national symbol of wildfire prevention and the public service campaign that created him reached the 80th anniversary mark this year. Rod Bain looks at some of the cultural and cumulative impacts of Smokey the Bear in this edition of Agriculture USA.
The icon of wildfire prevention efforts celebrates his 8th decade of service in 2024.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
And it has been a significant journey for Smokey Bear, the public service advertising campaign, and the character itself. From a record-setting length of service in presenting his message to
the U.S. Postal Service actually created Smokey's own zip code. Kind of shows the cultural height of popularity of Smokey.
I'm Ron Bain. Lincoln Bramwell of the U.S. Forest Service is among those joining us as we celebrate 80 years of Smokey Bear in this edition of Agriculture USA. A category of rarefied air. Those who have their own zip code within the United States. Any guesses who? The President of the United States.
The U.S. President has an individual zip code.
Shared with the First Lady, the 20500 zip code. Santa Claus? While mail to Santa goes to the town of North Pole, Alaska, zip code 99705, St. Nicholas himself does not have an individual zip code. Only one other individual can claim to have their own U.S. zip code.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
The symbol of wildfire prevention himself, Smokey Bear. According to U.S. Forest Service historian Lincoln Bramwell, while around since 1944 as an advertising campaign cartoon character, it was the rescue of a black bear cub from a New Mexico wildfire in 1950 that morphed the character into a living symbol residing in the National Zoo in Washington, D.C.
That's when Smokey's popularity really sort of took off. A symbol you could visit and see with your own eyes if you visited the National Zoo in our nation's capital. From there, Smokey became so popular and started receiving fan mail, primarily from children, and whole classes would write Smokey care of the National Zoo that the U.S. Postal Service actually created Smokey's own zip code.
The living symbol Smokey died in 1976, succeeded by a cub adopted 5 years earlier, Little Smokey, who became the living symbol of the National Zoo until his passing in 1990. Smokey's zip code remained active until it was decommissioned in 1993. However, Smokey Bear's popularity with citizens remained so strong, letters continued to be sent via the zip code to the wildfire prevention bear. That led to the Forest Service and the U.S. Postal Service to reactivate Smokey's zip code in 2014. The 70th anniversary of Smokey's creation through the joint Ad Council, Forest Service, National Association of State Foresters Public Service campaign. And while there was an interruption of sorts in Smokey's mail, there has been no such disruption in Smokey presenting his message to the American public.
It's pretty incredible to think about 80 years of a continuous public service announcement campaign.
That includes variations to that message over time. Perhaps the most significant occurred in 2001.
The formal message changed from only you can prevent forest fires to only you can prevent wildfires. And that was really done in recognition of how wildfires and fire events take place in sort of all kind of ecological conditions, not just tall standing forests that we think of. That was excluding all the other fuel types like grass fires and prairie fires.
80th anniversary celebrations are planned in various forms across the country in 2024. Recognition also comes in the way of a new public service advertising campaign for Smokey.
For decades, I've taught you everything I know, but I can only teach wildfire prevention.
A long-form social media video now available to honor Smokey, entitled Decades. The video also features the new voice of Smokey, actor Brian Tyree Henry. If you are unable to participate in upcoming 80th anniversary celebrations for Smokey Bear, you can always write a letter or send a postcard providing well wishes. Lincoln Bramwell, what is Smokey's zip code anyway?
20252.
You don't mind repeating that, do you?
20252.
Thank you very much, Lincoln. You can learn more about Smokey and wildfire prevention by going to his website, www.smokeybear.com. This has been Agriculture USA. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
If you are very afraid of snakes, you are not alone. Gary Crawford has more.
And now, classic comedian W.C. Fields on the subject of snakes.
Some of my best friends, Don, are snakes. Yeah, particularly rattlesnakes. I'll never forget the time I found a rattlesnake imprisoned under a rock. So I freed him, and with a grateful look in his eyes, he followed me home. And just before the little fellow curled up to sleep, he tried to kiss me.
Ooh, kissed by a snake? Ugh. I guess I am one of millions of people who not only want nothing to do with snakes, but who suffer from a strong fear or unreasoning aversion to them, a fear that's off the scale, so to speak. And it has a scientific name, doesn't it?
The fear of snakes is called ophidiophobia.
That's Drew Ricketts. He's a Kansas State University wildlife management specialist. So what was that name again? Ophidiophobia?
It's Ophidio, and then phobia, Phobia. The breakdown of that is ophidio, which is the Greek word for snake. And then phobia, of course, is fear.
Now, some say we have this innate, built-in fear of snakes, but Drew believes a lot of it comes from stories we've been exposed to since childhood, stories that give reptiles a very bad rep, so to speak.
Definitely, there's a strong association for humans with snakes as a source of evil.
Ooh, yes, and Drew says sometimes our parents can instill some fears about snakes.
You know, we're taught sometimes when we're young that we should fear snakes, and so adults want us to fear snakes when we're young so that we don't get a hold of something that we had not to. Because, of course, kids will grab a hold of anything. And it's sort of healthy to have at least some level of fear of things that could hurt us, especially if we can't tell the difference between the ones that might hurt us bad and the ones that might be, overall beneficial and might not hurt us at all.
Yes, because actually Drew says snakes provide a much-needed service for us.
Biologists would call it an ecological service that critters like snakes provide by, eating rodents that might get into our buildings or get into our houses and cause other problems that way, or by, reducing insect abundance, or eating other snakes that including venomous snakes. That's definitely a very positive role that snakes play.
Yeah, but some of us would just as soon not have them living in our yards, slithering around there, or getting into our homes. Next time, we're going to take a look at some ways to make our homes a little less inviting to our friends, the snakes. Gary Crawford reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
This is the AgNet News Hour. We will be back in just a moment with more of the day's agriculture news. You're listening to the AgNet News Hour. Brian German has today's featured interview.
Karen Ross, and I'm Secretary of the California Department of Food and Agriculture.
And we're here at the second annual Biological Summit here in Salinas, and you were one of the two people kind of kicking this event off, and just wanted to ask you from a CDFA standpoint, the role that biologicals might play and the interest there kind of moving forward with the idea of sustainable pest management.
Sure. So for us, we care about it deeply because of the many challenges facing growers that are just escalating with climate change, the more invasive pest introductions, longer season, more generations, fewer tools, resistance. There's a whole combination of that. And I think we set that stage really well last year. But little did I know that we would later, last year, end up with a historic infestation of fruit flies. And so I used our example because we were asked, what changed since last year, just what we lived through this past year, which is a perfect example of integrated pest management, but all the things that I'm hopeful biologicals can bring to our public programs in addition to really adding value to what a grower faces on a routine basis.
And there was kind of a couple instances or programs or avenues that might help facilitate either some education or some trials, or maybe integrating some more of these biological options, and how CDFA can help there. So what role might CDFA play, or what programs might be available to support this effort?
Yeah. So I really appreciate that question. And we have had some discretionary one-time dollars for sustainable pest management, which for us was restarting a program that the university used to fund, and it hasn't been funded for 15 years, biologically integrated farming systems. Very popular. It's a way of bringing a whole commodity group or a whole region around a particular pest issue, and then doing the trials, engaging the growers, providing technical expertise. And we've been able to fund a few of those programs over the last 3 or 4 years. We're also making funding for what we call proactive IPM, which, you always have to wonder, are we just sending people to chase the good pests? But you can start to see, like, what if X came here? What would we have in our toolbox as early as possible? Because the chances of that happening are very, very real. And so we've had some good projects proposed for that one. And then, of course, we've been able to bump up some of our funding in IR4, which does important work, especially for our specialty crops, which don't have the acreage and tend to get overlooked in the development of new products, trying to get the trial work done, get the data so that it's easier for registrants to start their registration process. Those are things we've been able to do. I believe that if we can really collaborate more closely with industry and our friends in academia, and we've got kind of a master plan approach of the technologies and tools that we're looking for, perhaps we can better position our California researchers with industry partners to draw down some federal dollars for funding programs that can make a huge difference for our specialty crop growers.
And that was one thing that you had noted of, I think everyone's aware of the budget situation in California, but you were first to kind of reiterate that budgets go up and they go down, and it's just cyclical in nature, and you're still looking forward.
I am looking forward. Obviously this year, there's going to be quite a bump in the mill increase, and so I think you heard Director Henderson reference the work they're doing to try to improve and bring lots of efficiencies to the registration process, the reevaluation process, and hopefully that work will lead us to some additional tools, whether they're biopesticides or other. I also thought it was very interesting, the panel that followed that, which was a global look at what's happening in Canada, the EU, Brazil. I thought that was really important to listen to that. Like, do we have a regulatory framework that will lend itself to really pushing up some of the more biologically based solutions? We just went through that on the fertilizer side with biostimulants. One of our really bright and talented young men in our fertilizer regulation program chaired a national committee to get a standardized definition through on biostimulants, which there's huge interest in by growers of all sizes these days. So I'm excited about the future. And then I just met 2 young guys from the UK, and they've got, it seems too good to be true, but what they can do for like our trapping programs, that could be more effective ways of trapping and getting early detection, but better monitoring at a scale that works for growers. But I'm thinking about it for our state programs. It's getting harder and harder to hire people and seasonal people, and it's labor intensive. It's labor intensive. So I'm excited about conversations like this, and seeing the size of the audience almost double just shows the interest and the desire to work on this, getting a better landscape of where the investment dollars are on this. And then how do we help solve some of the barriers that are presented on that? And education and outreach with growers, job number 1 for all of us.
And just lastly here to kind of recap, you touched on it, it was quite a year for some flies in various crops. Yeah. Just wanted to highlight, it was a pretty expansive effort that covered a wide range of things from CDFA. So how was that deployed, and what measure of success was seen there?
So it was a very frightening situation. It still is, that just how close we could have lost the whole thing. But when you find the numbers on one particular pest, oriental fruit fly was the really big one at scale that we'd never seen numbers like that. There was no time to sit back and go, oh, how did this happen? It was all hands on deck, county, state, federal government working very, very closely together. It has to be a seamless operation. We brought in Conservation Corps to help us with fruit stripping, which was one of the methodologies for us of getting those crops off those trees so that we could disrupt the life cycle of the pest, doing the treatment, but engaging with the public and making sure that we had outreach in all the languages we needed, that people knew what was going on, local government knew what was going on. So huge kudos to them. And then both the federal and state government made investments in the current fiscal year to make sure we could keep the programs going. I feel there have been a very minimal fines, which we expected, but I believe that we can start shrinking quarantines as early July, which would be astounding when you looked at the situation we were in. The other thing that was really interesting, we had medfly, but that's very traditional in the LA basin, and if Kurt Florin ever retires from LA, we're in trouble because he's Mr. Walking Medfly. But we had Tau fruit fly and we had Queensland fruit fly. Those are frightening because these are species that have not been found in this hemisphere. We also do genetic mapping and we slice and dice the finds. We know that these are not residual infestations. These are new species of the same pest. So what's happening, what's different at the point of origin? Are there different cropping patterns, different infrastructure that's allowing this? We know the huge increase in travel is a big piece of this. E-commerce, it could be a potential pathway. So we're in that deep dive analysis now. After the fact, it's important that we dissect it and we understand where did we have some gaps in our system that's, about keeping it out, and did we respond in the right way at the right time? And I feel at this stage, we're definitely on the right track, but it was a very frightening year. I'll just leave it at that for all of us and for the growers that were impacted with quarantines. We want to be able to release those quarantines as soon as possible.
So immediately it was a triage situation, but now that the worst of it seemingly is behind everyone, now we can dig in and look at prevention.
We really need to figure out what has changed to the extent that we can. And we have allocated resources on high-risk pathway, resource allocation for us and the counties on the same kinds of information that came out of studies from 30 years ago. Well, what's really the same and what's different? And so I'm hopeful this will lead to us sitting down with our partners to talk about reallocation formulas based on high-risk pathway today. As using data from old times is really great, but there's something different going on, and we really need to understand that and prepare ourselves as best we can.
That was Brian German with today's featured interview. You're listening to the AgNet News Hour. This segment is brought to you by Live Earth Products. To get to know a little more about Live Earth Products, we're talking on the phone today with Vice President Russell Taylor. What about humates in animal feed? When can you add humates to the animal feed, and what is the benefit of that?
So the interesting thing about animal feeds is just like the fertilizer side, there's actually a lot going on in legislative processes. So there's an act out called the Innovative Feed Act. And currently, you can't include things in animal feed that are giving you other benefits besides nutritive benefits. Let's say, for example, you had a cow that was eating a product that reduced its methane emissions, those enteric gases that are caused just in the natural digestion of a ruminating cow. You can't claim that those products do that benefit. So hopefully people will get involved and say, look, the Innovative Feed Act is necessary and should help farmers. Other benefits of feeding humate is obviously first to reduce enteric gases. But the second one, these are old plant materials. So those plant materials are rich in trace minerals. So not only are you getting something that's going to help the digestion of the animal, you're also getting an abundant supply of minerals. So that is the main reason farmers are currently including in their animal feeds.
This is all fascinating, but it can be hard to retain some of this information when you're hearing this on the radio or through the podcast. So is there someplace online, or where can our listeners go and get more information?
Well, the good news is the acts I mentioned, like the Innovative Feed Act and the Plant Biostimulant Act, are publicly available through Congress. You can actually go look at those acts. They're on the website there. The other information you can get is directly through Live Earth Products. So if you go to liveearth.com, contact us. You can contact us and our agronomy team. And we're happy to go over any details, questions about how to use these products, how they fit your farm program. how to use them as a tool to implement conservation practices such as nutrient retention, water conservation, and improving soil health.
To get to know more about Live Earth products, you can visit them online at liveearth.com. That is spelled LIVEARTH.com. Remnants of a recent heat wave remain in several areas of the West, with above normal high temperatures continuing. Rod Bain reports.
The predominant part of a ridge of high pressure across the country has bubbled over to the coastal areas in recent days. According to USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey,
we've gotten a big break from the heat in the middle part of the country, and that certainly includes the northern plains into the Midwest. Temperatures have actually fallen to below normal levels for several days recently, and that continues into this week.
Heat, meanwhile, has become the focal weather pattern in much of the West.
As you look west of the Rockies, we have established a monsoon circulation, but at this point, we're seeing primarily showers and thunderstorms confined to the southeastern half of the Four Corners region, meaning parts of Arizona, generally the southeastern part of the state, New Mexico doing pretty well, and parts of southern and eastern Colorado getting into that monsoon circulation. The rest of the West is dry and increasingly hot. So that's one area that we will be focused on for heat.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
That's today's top agriculture news. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. Thank you for sharing your morning with us.
To get more information on the topics you heard today, visit AgNet West online at agnetwest.com. You can also stay connected by following us on our social media at AgNet West on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also find our broadcast team of Brian German and Sabrina Halvorson on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you for listening to the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. AgNet West Radio Network, your primary choice for agriculture news.